the rhythmic crash of waves against the rocky shoreline was punctuated by the flash of blue and red lights illuminating the early morning mist. Police vehicles lined the stretch of Ocean View Drive, the sound of radios crackling amid murmured conversations. Residents of Pacific Sands, a beach city known for its postcard-perfect scenery and opulent homes, gathered in hushed groups at the edge of their pristine lawns. The focus of their attention was an imposing modernist house perched on the cliffs overlooking the Pacific. Sleek glass walls designed to reflect sunsets now mirrored the chaos of the scene. Uniformed officers moving briskly, forensic teams unloading equipment, and a stretcher being wheeled to the ambulance with its doors ominously closed. Detective Rachel Alvarez surveyed the scene, her sharp eyes missing nothing. She had seen her fair share of crime in her 15-year career, but there was something particularly chilling about this one. "What do we have?" she asked, addressing a young officer standing stiffly at the edge of the driveway. "Victim is Preston Hartley, age 51, found in his office. Looks like a gunshot wound to the chest. The weapon was recovered nearby." Alvarez frowned. Preston Hartley was not just another wealthy resident of Pacific Sands. He was a tech mogul, philanthropist, and the unofficial face of the city's elite. "And the woman?" The officer hesitated. "Still inside. She called it in. Says she found him like that. Name's Lila Kane." Alvarez's frown deepened. The name meant nothing to her, but the details would come later. She made her way through the meticulously landscaped pathway and into the sprawling house, where the scent of salt air mixed with the sterility of forensics. In the sleek office, Lila sat on a leather chair, her face pale, hands shaking. She was young, late 20s, Alvarez guessed, with dark hair pulled into a loose ponytail. Her tear-streaked face was a mask of shock, but Alvarez couldn't ignore the tension in her posture, as if she were bracing for something. "What happened?" Alvarez asked gently. Lila's voice trembled. "I came to see him early this morning. He told me he had something important to say. When I got here, the door was unlocked. I found him like this." "Did he mention what he wanted to talk about?" Alvarez pressed. Lila shook her head, avoiding eye contact. "No, I don't know." Alvarez scanned the room. A shattered wine glass lay near the desk, dark stains seeping into the plush white carpet. The laptop sat closed on the desk, a phone blinking with unread messages beside it. This wasn't a simple break-in gone wrong. This was something far more personal. As she stepped outside to consult with her team, Alvarez's instincts kicked in. The perfect veneer of Preston Hartley's life was about to crack wide open, and whatever lay beneath would explain far more than the scene she had just witnessed. "There I go," Lorraine said. She walked up to the motorcycle. Unbeknownst to her, the story that would unravel would involve power, betrayal, and a web of secrets spun tighter than anyone could have imagined. 15 years earlier, Pacific Sands had welcomed Preston Hartley like a king returning to his kingdom. He was the epitome of the American dream, a college dropout turned tech visionary who had built his company, Ocean Line Technologies, from a one-man startup in a cramped San Francisco apartment into a billion-dollar enterprise. The city embraced him with open arms. Preston's success was celebrated not just for its financial triumph, but for his charisma. He was a man who made you believe anything was possible, his confident smile as dazzling as the ocean view from his sprawling cliffside estate. He had arrived with his wife, Claudia, and their twin daughters Isabel and Sophie, then just 8 years old. The Hartleys quickly became fixtures of Pacific Sands society. Claudia, a former attorney with a talent for hosting, transformed their home into the heart of the city's social calendar, hosting glittering fundraisers and exclusive dinner parties. But Preston's real love was his company. Ocean Line Technologies specialized in cutting-edge data analytics, merging AI with predictive software to reshape industries. Preston's ability to foresee market trends had made him a legend in Silicon Valley, and his public image as an innovative thinker and devoted family man made him a media darling. To those who knew him, it seemed like Preston had everything: wealth, influence, a beautiful family, and an enviable lifestyle. But those closest to him also saw cracks in the facade. Claudia often remarked to her friends, "He's married to his work first, me second." The statement was always accompanied by a laugh, but there was truth beneath the humor. Preston's relentless drive to stay ahead in a rapidly evolving tech landscape consumed him. Late nights at the office, endless business trips, and an almost obsessive focus on his family left little time for his family. By the time Isabel and Sophie entered high school, Claudia had grown accustomed to their father's absences. "He works so we can have this life," she would explain to the girls. But as they grew older, the justification felt increasingly hollow. The details left them with only a sense of accomplishment. Despite this, the Hartleys maintained appearances. Publicly, they were the perfect family. Preston adored his daughters, doting on them during rare weekends at home. Claudia, always elegant and poised, made it look effortless. Yet behind the gates of their sprawling home, the family's connection was beginning to fray. In the fall of 2017, Preston's world expanded further when Ocean Line Technologies acquired a promising new startup, Lumina Analytics. Among the acquisitions was a young marketing executive named Lila Kane. Fresh out of graduate school, Lila had joined Lumina as a marketing intern and quickly risen through the ranks. She was brilliant, ambitious, and fiercely independent, qualities that caught Preston's attention. When she was invited to join Ocean Line's headquarters in Pacific Sands, it was hailed as a career-defining opportunity. For Lila, it was a chance to leave behind her modest upbringing in a small Oregon town and cement her place in the tech world. For Preston, it was the beginning of something he couldn't quite define yet. The introduction of Lila Kane into his life would change everything. Not all at once, but like the tide eroding the shore, slowly and irrevocably. Lila Kane arrived in Pacific Sands like a spark thrown into a dry field. At just 27, she had already built a reputation as a rising star in tech marketing, her bold campaigns at Lumina Analytics earning praise for their ingenuity. But beneath her polished exterior was a hunger born of years spent watching others ascend while she struggled to climb. Her upbringing in Oak Ridge, Oregon, was far from the glittering world she now inhabited. But there was no such thing as financial glory, and paying cash extraction fees for the ways she'd done so was benevolent. Her father had been a mechanic, her mother a part-time waitress, and Lila was the only one in her family to graduate college. Every step she'd taken had been hard-won, and her ambitions burned hotter because of it. When Ocean Line acquired Lumina, Lila knew it was her chance to break into the big leagues. Moving to Pacific Sands was intimidating, but she wasn't one to shy away from challenges. She threw herself into her new role, impressing colleagues with her work ethic and charm. It wasn't long before she caught Preston Hartley's attention. Their first real conversation took place at an industry event in San Diego. Ocean Line had just launched its latest software update, and Lila had been instrumental in crafting the campaign. Preston approached her after her presentation. Advancing quickly, he reached for her, but she drew away from him, stopping him, his smile warm and disarming. "Impressive work," he said. "You've got a knack for understanding what people want before they even know they want it." Coming from a man of Preston's stature, the compliment hit Lila like a shot of adrenaline. She smiled, meeting his gaze. "I could say the same about you, Mr. Hartley." "Call me Preston," he replied. That brief exchange led to more interactions. At meetings, company events, and casual encounters in the sleek, glass-walled offices of Ocean Line. At first, it was purely professional. Preston valued her perspective, often seeking her input on projects. But over time, the conversations grew more personal. Lila found herself drawn to Preston's energy, his confidence, and the way he seemed genuinely interested in her ideas. For a man in his position, he was surprisingly approachable, even vulnerable at times. Spoke about the pressures of running a company, the loneliness that came with success, and his dreams of creating something that would outlast him. For Preston, Lila represented something he hadn't felt in years: excitement. Her ambition reminded him of his younger self, and her presence was a welcome distraction from the pressures of his life. At first, he told himself it was harmless, a mentor-mentee relationship, nothing more. But the line between professional admiration and personal connection began to blur. Lila, too, found herself caught in a web of emotions she hadn't anticipated. Preston's attention made her feel seen in a way she hadn't before. She knew it was dangerous. He was married, after all. But she couldn't deny the pull she felt toward him. Their relationship took its first step towards something more during a late-night strategy meeting. The office was empty, the city lights casting a soft glow through the windows. They were reviewing a campaign proposal when Preston leaned back in his chair and sighed. "Matt, you ever feel like you're living someone else's life?" he asked, his voice low. Lila hesitated, sensing the weight of his words. "I don't know. Maybe. But isn't that why we work so hard? To make the life we want?" Preston looked at her then, his expression unreadable. "Maybe," he said softly. The moment hung in the air, charged with unspoken possibilities. Neither of them acted on it that night, but it marked the beginning of something neither could control. By the time they crossed the line, weeks later, at a secluded boutique hotel off the Pacific Coast Highway, they were both in too deep to turn back. The affair began cautiously, a series of calculated risks masked as innocuous decisions. A dinner meeting that extended into the late hours, a shared cab ride after a company event, and finally, an unspoken agreement that their connection had outgrown the boundaries of professional decorum. Their first rendezvous at the boutique hotel was cloaked in guilt, but neither could deny the electricity between them. It was a hidden world they created together, one far removed from the pressures of their public lives. Preston found himself mesmerized by Lila's vitality, her unfiltered passion for life. Lila, in turn, was drawn to the powerful man who saw her not just as an employee but as an equal. To sustain their secrecy, Preston arranged for the use of a rented beach house outside of town. The modest two-bedroom home, tucked behind a row of tall palms, became their private escape. Its weathered walls and sandy floors were a stark contrast to Preston's glass and marble mansion, but that was part of the appeal. "Here, we can just be," Preston said during one of their early visits, pouring wine into mismatched glasses. Lila smiled, but the weight of their situation was never far from her mind. She knew the danger of what they were doing, knew the stakes for both of them, but she was already too entangled to walk away. Their meetings followed an unspoken schedule. Preston would carve out time under the guise of business trips or late work hours, while Lila learned to keep her calendar flexible. They communicated through burner phones, encrypted messages, and shared calendars with deliberately vague entries. Despite their precautions, the risks grew. On one occasion, they were nearly spotted by an acquaintance of Preston's while dining at a secluded waterfront cafe. Another time, a curious assistant at Ocean Line noticed Preston's frequent absences and remarked on it during a staff meeting. "We should stop," Lila whispered one night as they sat on the weathered porch of the beach house, watching the sun dip below the horizon. Preston's hand found hers. "Do you want to stop?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "No." He missed important family dinners, invented last-minute business emergencies, and started delegating key responsibilities at Ocean Line to trusted lieutenants. Claudia, ever perceptive, began to sense something was amiss. She noticed Preston's growing absences, the way his attention seemed elsewhere even when he was home. But when she questioned him, he brushed off her concerns with practiced ease. "Just the usual work stress," he'd say, kissing her on the cheek before disappearing into his study. For Lila, the affair was both exhilarating and exhausting. Lila nodded. She thrived on the thrill of being with Preston, but struggled with the isolation of keeping their relationship a secret. Her friends noticed her frequent absences and her increasing reluctance to talk about her personal life. "You're always working?" her best friend Amanda remarked one evening over drinks. "When's the last time you actually had fun?" Lila forced a smile, deflecting the question with a joke. But deep down, she knew she was trapped in a cycle of lies that couldn't last forever. The sands of their hidden world shifted with each passing day, eroded by the inevitability of discovery. Neither Lila nor Preston could predict how their carefully constructed facade would crumble, but both knew it was only a matter of time. By the summer of 2018, the cracks in Preston Hartley's carefully curated life were beginning to show. It was Claudia who first noticed the subtle changes. Preston, always meticulous, began forgetting small details, a neighbor's name, an anniversary dinner he himself had planned. His once short wardrobe started to look slightly disheveled, a mismatched tie, a wrinkled cuff. To outsiders, these were insignificant, the normal quirks of a man under pressure. But Claudia knew better. "Everything all right?" she asked one evening as he stood by the window staring out at the ocean with a whiskey in hand. Preston turned, startled. "Of course. Just a lot on my mind." She didn't press further, but her unease lingered. At Ocean Line, whispers began circulating among the staff. Preston, once a constant presence at the office, was now frequently absent. Meetings were rescheduled at the last minute, emails went unanswered for days, and key decisions were delayed. His trusted COO, Mark Davidson, started stepping in to fill the gaps, though he never openly questioned Preston's authority. "He's spread too thin," Mark confided to another executive during a lunch break. "The man needs a vacation, but you know Preston. He'll never admit it." But it wasn't just exhaustion weighing on Preston. His obsession with maintaining his dual life was consuming him. Every interaction with Lila carried the risk of exposure, every text message and phone call a potential landmine. He began running scenarios in his head, calculating the fallout if their affair were discovered. The stakes, his family, his company, his reputation, seemed insurmountable. The strain began affecting his judgment. During a high-stakes meeting with potential investors, Preston stumbled through his presentation, forgetting key figures and misreading the room. The deal, which would have secured a lucrative partnership, fell apart. Claudia's suspicions deepened when she overheard fragments of a hushed phone conversation late one night. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone, urgent, intimate, set her on edge. "Who were you talking to?" she asked when Preston returned to bed. "Mark," he replied smoothly. "We're dealing with some last-minute issues on a project." But Claudia wasn't convinced. He began piecing together small inconsistencies, unexplained absences, vague excuses, and the sudden appearance of a second phone in his briefcase. For Lila, the cracks in Preston's life manifested in different ways. Their once thrilling rendezvous began to feel rushed, fraught with tension. Preston grew paranoid, checking his phone constantly and insisting on new layers of secrecy. He even suggested they scale back their meetings, a proposal that left Lila feeling rejected and uncertain. "You're pulling away," she said one evening at the beach house, her voice trembling. "I'm trying to protect us," Preston replied, though even he wasn't sure he believed it. The weight of their affair began to take its toll on Lila. She found herself increasingly distracted at work, her once flawless performance marred by missed deadlines and careless mistakes. When her manager pulled her aside to express concern, Lila forced a smile and promised to refocus. But the truth was, she couldn't stop thinking about Preston and the life she wanted with him. The tension between them came to a head one evening when Lila confronted Preston about their future. "I can't keep living like this," she said, her voice breaking. "Hiding, pretending, it's tearing me apart." Preston sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Do you think this is easy for me? I'm trying to hold everything together. For you, for my family, for the company. Do you know what would happen if this got out?" "I don't care about the company," Lila snapped. "I care about us." Got it. No more running away from the truth. No more dead ends for a few days." The door slid shut. "Or are we just a distraction for you?" Her words cut deeper than she realized. Preston didn't respond, his silence speaking volumes. For the first time, Lila wondered if she had misjudged him, if the man she'd fallen for was not the savior she imagined, but someone who would ultimately choose the life he already had over the one she wanted to build with him. The cracks in the glass were growing larger, and both Preston and Lila were standing too close to the edge. The turning point came on an unseasonably warm evening in late September, during Claudia Hartley's meticulously planned charity gala. It was the kind of event that defined Pacific Sands' elite. Sparkling gowns, tailored suits, and trays of champagne gliding seamlessly through the crowd. The Hartleys' cliffside home was transformed into a shimmering beacon of wealth and benevolence. Hearing a familiar voice at the doorway, he waited, its glass walls casting warm light onto the Pacific below. Preston had always played the role of gracious host effortlessly, but tonight he felt like an actor in a play he no longer wanted to be part of. As Claudia charmed the guests with her poise and wit, Preston found himself retreating to the edges of the party, a glass of bourbon in hand. It was there, in the quiet shadows of the terrace, that Lila appeared. Her presence at the gala was unexpected and dangerous. She wasn't on the guest list, but as a rising figure at Ocean Line, her attendance could be explained away. Barely. Yet the sight of her, stunning in a black dress that hugged her frame, sent a jolt through Preston. "What are you doing here?" he hissed, pulling her aside. "I needed to see you," Lila whispered, her voice trembling. "You've been avoiding me for weeks." "This isn't the time or place," Preston said sharply, glancing over his shoulder. "When is it ever?" she shot back, her eyes glistening. "I can't keep doing this, Preston. I need to know where we stand." The intensity of her words and the raw emotion in her voice struck a chord he couldn't ignore. He wanted to tell her everything. That he was suffocating under the weight of his double life. That he dreamed of a future with her, but couldn't see a way to make it happen. She listened, but before he could respond, Claudia's voice cut through the tension. "Preston?" Both turned to see Claudia standing in the doorway, her expression a careful mask of curiosity and concern. "Claudia," Preston began, forcing a smile. "You remember Lila? She's with Ocean Line." Claudia's gaze flicked to Lila, her polite smile never faltering. "Of course. Lovely to see you again. Enjoying the party?" Lila nodded, her voice tight. "It's beautiful. You've done an amazing job." "Well, thank you," Claudia said, her eyes lingering on Lila for a moment longer than necessary. "Preston, the guests are asking for you. Don't be too long." As Claudia disappeared back into the crowd, Preston exhaled sharply. "You need to leave," he said, his voice low but firm. Lila's face hardened. "Fine," she said, turning on her heel and disappearing into the night. The moment was brief, but it left a ripple that would reverberate through every aspect of Preston's life. Claudia's suspicions, already simmering, began to boil. The following day, she found herself replaying the interaction in her mind, the tension in Preston's voice, the way he'd stood too close to Lila, the unspoken energy between them. She decided to follow her instincts. Hiring a private investigator felt drastic, but Claudia justified it as necessary. "If I'm wrong, then I'll apologize," she told herself. "But if I'm right—" For Layla, the encounter marked the beginning of disillusionment. She spent hours walking along the beach that night, replaying the evening in her mind. The man she thought would fight for her had pushed her away, choosing his wife's comfort over their connection. At Ocean Line, tensions were also mounting. Mark Davidson, the COO, had begun noticing irregularities in Preston's schedule. Meetings were rescheduled without explanation, key projects were delegated to others, and Preston's once unshakable focus seemed to waver. "You're slipping, Preston," Mark said bluntly during a private meeting. "What's going on?" "Nothing I can't handle," Preston replied, but even he didn't believe it anymore. As the weeks passed, the ripples of that night expanded. Claudia's investigator began uncovering troubling details. Bank transfers, unaccounted-for expenses, and a rental property under a shell corporation's name. Lila began to pull away, unsure of her place in Preston's life, and Preston himself found the walls closing in, his once immaculate life fracturing under the weight of his choices. The stage was set for a reckoning, and no one involved would emerge unscathed. By the time winter settled over Pacific Sands, the chain of events that had begun months earlier had spiraled out of control. Every lie, every moment of deceit, had stacked upon each other until it became impossible for Preston to deny the truth. His life was no longer under his control. It was a series of reactions, each more desperate and reckless than the last. The first cracks in his professional life came during a critical board meeting at Ocean Line Technologies. Preston had been absent for most of the week, citing personal matters, but his uncharacteristic disarray raised suspicions. The meeting room was tense, the air thick with unspoken questions. Mark Davidson, still trying to hold the company together, glanced at Preston across the table. The usual confidence was gone from his face, replaced by a strained look that only deepened Mark's concerns. "Preston," Mark began carefully, "the board is growing concerned about your recent absences. We've noticed discrepancies in the quarterly projections, and expenses are running higher than expected." Preston's jaw clenched when he gave a tight smile. "It's just temporary. A few adjustments here and there will be fine." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, but no one dared challenge him directly. Preston had earned his position after all. His track record had been flawless up until now. But the pressure of maintaining appearances, of juggling his affair with Lila, and the ever-growing demands from Claudia was taking a toll on him. Preston's mind was no longer sharp, his ability to make decisions clouded by his mounting personal crises. Later that week, an unexpected message came through from Lila. Her words, once filled with longing, now conveyed a sense of urgency. "We need to talk. I can't do this anymore, not like this." Preston felt his stomach tighten. He had promised her that they would have a future together, but his promises had become empty. The words from the message lingered in his mind as he stared out at the Pacific, a storm beginning to churn inside him. He knew Layla was right. Something had to change, but he didn't know how to make it happen. Claudia's suspicions, meanwhile, had grown sharper. She spent sleepless nights reviewing documents, combing through Preston's records with the cold detachment of someone whose trust had been shattered beyond repair. Every discrepancy, every late-night phone call, every unexplained expense had added to her certainty that her husband was hiding something. The breaking point came one evening when Claudia confronted Preston directly. "You've been lying to me," she said, her voice steady but heavy with betrayal. "I know about Leela. I know what's been going on." Preston froze, his face paling. The words were out in the open now, and there was no taking them back. "Claudia, please. I want the truth, Preston, not more excuses. How long?" He stood there, unable to form a coherent thought. How long? How could he answer that when he no longer had a clear grasp of his own actions? "Months," he finally muttered. "But it's complicated, Claudia. Complicated." Claudia scoffed. "You're ruining everything we've built. Our family, our life, and for what? A fling? Our life, and for what? A fling?" Preston said. "I'm lost, Claudia. I don't know how to fix this. I don't know what to do anymore." The words hung in the air between them, suffocating. Claudia stood, her body rigid with anger and disappointment. "I'll have a lawyer contact you." "I'm done, Preston." She turned on her heel and walked out, leaving him standing in the dimly lit hallway of their home, a man unraveling before his own eyes. The spiral deepened. As Claudia prepared for the inevitable divorce, "I can't be part of this anymore, Preston," she told him one evening. "It's destroying me. I need to walk away." Her words hit Preston like a punch to the gut. He had built a life on controlling everything, on being the one who held the strings. But now, it seemed the strings were snapping one by one. With his personal life crumbling, Preston's professional one followed suit. Ocean Line stock prices began to falter as news of the internal turmoil spread, albeit quietly at first. Investors were nervous, and the board members, now openly questioning his leadership, began preparing for a possible change at the top. In a rare moment of clarity, Preston realized that it was all slipping away. The family he had betrayed, the career he had sacrificed everything for, and the woman he had convinced himself he loved. They were all slipping through his fingers. He had one final option left: escape. But the escape would come with consequences. A decision would have to be made, one that would forever alter the lives of everyone involved. The days that followed were an endless blur of cold, calculating conversations. Preston had always prided himself on being able to handle crises with grace, but now every word he spoke felt like it was building toward an inevitable. The tension between him and Claudia became unbearable. It wasn't just the confrontation, it was the silence that followed. Every room in their home seemed to echo with the absence of trust. Every glance a reminder of the life they had built together and now seemed to be unraveling. The kids, once oblivious to the cracks in their parents' marriage, had become keenly aware of the shifting dynamic. Claudia had made it clear she was done. A lawyer had already been in touch, and the paperwork for divorce was in motion. But despite all the assurances of resolution, Preston couldn't help but wonder if there was any way to undo what had been done. He tried to apologize, to explain that it wasn't just a fling, but a misguided search for something he couldn't articulate. But Claudia was resolute, each word she spoke making it harder for him to breathe. "You destroyed our family, Preston," she said one evening, her eyes devoid of the warmth they once held. "I can't look at you anymore. You've broken everything." Her words hit harder than anything he'd ever heard. But it wasn't just Claudia who was affected. Preston's relationship with his children had also been shattered. In the midst of this turmoil, the question remained, could Preston salvage anything from the wreckage? Could he even redeem himself in the eyes of his children, his colleagues, or anyone who had once trusted him? Or was he simply too far gone, lost in a spiral of his own making? As the legal proceedings continued, Preston found himself spending hours in his office at Ocean Line Technologies. But his mind was never truly on his work. His once sharp focus had dulled, and every decision felt like a burden he was no longer equipped to handle. His professional life, too, was on the brink of collapse. By the time the divorce papers were finalized, Preston was no longer the confident executive he had once been. He had become a shell of the man who had built a thriving career and a seemingly perfect life. Now he was alone, surrounded by the fallout of his choices. As he sat in the empty, sterile conference room at Ocean Line, staring at a report that no longer seemed to matter, Preston realized that nothing, no professional success, no affair, no escape, could undo the damage he had done. It began as a whisper in the halls of Ocean Line Technologies. Preston's absences, the company's declining performance, and rumors of his deteriorating personal life were all pieces of a puzzle the board and employees were piecing together. But whispers soon turned into headlines when an anonymous source leaked the story to the press. Scandal at Ocean Line. CEO Preston Hayes faces allegations of misconduct and family crisis. The article, published on a popular business news site, was scathing. It detailed Preston's affair and the subsequent fallout of his marriage and the company's internal struggles. While it refrained from outright accusing him of financial misconduct, it heavily implied that his personal distractions had contributed to the company's recent instability. Preston first saw the article during a morning meeting. One of the junior executives had forwarded it to him with a curt note, "We need to discuss this." The blood drained from his face as he read each damning paragraph. By the time he arrived at the office, the story had already spread. Employees exchanged furtive glances as he walked past, their whispered conversations abruptly stopping when he entered the room. For the first time, Preston felt what it was like to be on the other side of power, to be the subject of scrutiny and judgment. The board wasted no time calling an emergency meeting. As Preston sat at the head, Mark Davidson, his longtime colleague and the board's chair, opened the meeting. "Preston," Mark began, his tone measured but firm, "we've always respected your leadership. But this," he gestured to the article on the screen behind him, "this puts the company in an impossible position." Preston tried to defend himself, his voice wavering as he spoke. "These are personal matters, Mark. They have no bearing on my ability to lead this company." "They do," Mark interjected sharply. "The stock is slipping, our investors are pulling out, and now the media is digging into every aspect of your life. This isn't just about you, Preston. It's about Ocean Line. And right now, the board is questioning whether you're the right person to steer this ship." The room was silent. Preston felt the weight of every gaze, every judgment. He wanted to fight back, to remind them of all he had achieved for the company. But deep down, he knew they were right. By the end of the meeting, the board had voted to place Preston on an indefinite leave of absence. The press release framed it as a mutual decision, emphasizing his commitment to addressing personal matters. But Preston knew the truth. His career was in free fall. The scandal didn't stop at Ocean Line. The local media picked up on the story, framing it as a morality tale about greed, betrayal, and downfall. Preston's face was splashed across headlines, his name trending on social media alongside words like affair, disgrace, and failure. For Claudia and the children, the public exposure was unbearable. Reporters camped outside their home, eager for a comment or a photograph. Preston, now a pariah in both his personal and professional life, retreated into isolation. He shut off his phone, ignored emails, and stopped leaving his apartment except for the occasional walk along the deserted beach near his home. Each step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by regret and the realization that he had become the architect of his own destruction. But even in his isolation, the world didn't forget. Every new article, every social media post was a reminder that his actions had consequences, not just for him, but for everyone who had once trusted and depended on him. The winter wind cut through the air as Preston sat in his dimly lit apartment, staring at the stack of documents that marked the end of his marriage and the uncertain future of his career. He had reached a point where every decision, every action seemed like a futile attempt to regain control. And then the call came. It was Lila. Her voice, once filled with warmth and longing, now carried an edge of panic. "Preston, I need to see you. Now. It's important." He hesitated. Their last conversation had been tense, with Lila expressing her desire to walk away from the chaos he had brought into her life, but there was something in her tone that made him agree. They arranged to meet at her beachfront rental, a secluded property where their affair had often played out in secret. When Preston arrived, the place was dark, except for a single lamp casting shadows across the room. Lila was pacing, her arms crossed tightly across her chest. Her face was pale, her usual composure replaced by visible distress. "What's going on?" he asked, stepping inside and closing the door behind him. Lila turned to face him, her eyes brimming with tears. "It's over, Preston. All of it. I can't do this anymore." The sound of her voice, calm, measured, yet distant, startled him. After everything that had happened, he hadn't expected to hear from her again. "We need to talk," she said. "Come to that house. I'm ready to listen." Despite his initial hesitation, hope flickered in Preston's chest. Perhaps this was his chance to finally make amends, to explain himself and start rebuilding what was broken. Without a second thought, he grabbed his coat and left. When he arrived at the house, it was eerily quiet. Lila was waiting for him in the living room, seated in a chair with her back straight and her hands folded in her lap. A handgun rested on the table beside her. Preston froze. "Lila, what's this about?" Her expression was unreadable as she rose to her feet. "Sit down, Preston." He hesitated, glancing nervously at the weapon. "I came here to talk, not to—" He complied, lowering himself onto the couch opposite her. "I loved you," she began, her voice trembling. "I believed in you. But you lied to me, Preston. You destroyed everything I cared about. You ruined my life." "It was never my intention to hurt you," Preston said, his voice earnest but shaky. "I made mistakes, but I've paid for them. I'm trying to be better." Lila laughed bitterly. "Better? You think you can just walk away from everything you've done? That you can live some quiet life while I'm left to pick up the pieces of your mess?" Preston leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "I'm sorry, Lila. Truly I am, but this isn't the way." Her eyes filled with tears, but her grip on the gun was steady as she picked it up and pointed it at him. "You don't get to decide that, Preston. Not anymore." "Lila, please," he pleaded, raising his hands in surrender. "We can work through this. The sound of the gunshot was deafening, echoing through the room. Preston's body jerked backward as the bullet struck him square in the chest. He collapsed onto the couch, gasping for air, his eyes wide with shock and pain. Blood spread rapidly across his shirt as he struggled to speak, but no words came. Lila stood there, her hands trembling now, watching as the dope drained from him. When the police arrived, Lila made no attempt to flee. She was arrested on the spot, her confession calm but unwavering. The trial became a media spectacle, with public opinion sharply divided. The prosecution painted Lila as a cold-blooded killer, driven by vengeance rather than self-defense. The defense argued that years of manipulation and emotional abuse at Preston's hands had pushed her to the breaking point, and that the act was one of temporary insanity. Friends and colleagues testified, revealing the depth of Preston's deceit and the emotional toll it had taken on Lila. Emily, Lila's best friend, spoke of the fear and despair Lila had confided in her over the years, But the most damning piece of evidence came from Lila herself. Her taped confession to the police, replayed in court, left little doubt about her intent. "I wanted him to feel the pain he caused me," she said, and "I wanted him to understand what it's like to lose everything." After weeks of testimony and deliberation, the jury reached a decision. Guilty of second-degree murder, the four-person announced. Lila was sentenced to 15 years in prison, with a possibility of parole after 10. The sentence was a harsh reminder of the cost of her actions, but in her eyes, it was justice. Behind bars, Lila found a strange sense of peace. She had paid for her crime, but she had also reclaimed her power in a way she never thought possible. Preston Hayes, the man who had destroyed so much of her life, could no longer hurt anyone else. For the world outside, the story of Lila and Preston became yet another cautionary tale, a reminder of the devastating consequences of unchecked ambition, betrayal, and revenge. But for Lila, it was simply the end of a chapter she had longed to close. If you enjoyed this dive into the mystery, don't forget to subscribe to True Crime OCS for more chilling stories from history's darkest corners. Drop your thoughts, theories, and questions in the comments below. Let's untangle the truth together. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.